Welcome to Chillers and Thrillers Extras, paranormal stories that I include just for my YouTube subscribers. Thank you for joining, and let's get started. Are You a Bad Ghost? By Haley Catherine. I thought I would share a story of my dad's. Our family has many stories where none of us can quite explain it to non-skeptics. We believe we are definitely clairvoyant to some degree. My parents tell me stories from when I was younger. I'm not as in tune to it as they are, but this story is one of my dad's from his days growing up in a small town outside Toronto. The boys in the story, many of them now fathers and grandfathers, refuse to discuss the story unless they are all together, had a few beers, and the lights are all turned on. Other than that, it is not talked about. The house I'm going to refer to has two parts to the story. Part 1. My dad and his friends had gathered in the basement of Jason's house. All names have been changed for privacy. And were doing what kids at the time did, smoking cigarette butts that they stole from the ashtray and playing with games and toys. One of the boys had found a Ouija board. With little else to do, they decided, why not? They began with silly starter questions like, does this girl at school like me? Will I pass the English test? And then they decided to get more brave. Is there a ghost down here? Yes, the Ouija board led their hands to the answer. All the boys giggled, thinking this was fantastic. Are you a nice ghost or a bad ghost? Yes, the Ouija board said back. Jason smacked the question asker in the back of the head, explaining that they need to ask single questions. Are you a nice ghost? No. The boys got quiet, and one of the lights in the basement let out a loud pop before the corner of the basement went dark. This is the mid-60s, and this home was pre-World War I. Light bulbs are going to pop. Are you a bad ghost? Yes. A second light popped in the opposite room. Only one light remained in the basement above the boy's head. What's your name? They watched as the board began spelling out letters, with one of the boys keeping track. William. It says William, the boy yelled out. They felt a flood of air surge through the room. And the next part, none of them can explain. The air moved the Ouija board across the room, and all the boys stood up and backed across the room, staring at a lone mirror in the room. Only they didn't see their reflection. They saw an older man with dark black eyes and a long beard and circular lenses staring back at them. They all started yelling, "Go away," and the mirror slid off the wall and shattered before the last light went pop. The boys went back upstairs and refused to play in Jason's basement ever again. Part 2. Flash forward to many years later. Jason's mom had sold the house and moved across town, and Jason and my dad were left to pack up the home. That included the basement. My dad kept loaning boxes, and people had been in and out all day helping. He got downstairs where a man was standing by a washboard, just standing. Naturally, he asked the man if he could lend a hand. The man stared back. He seemed to have a glowing look to him, but my dad chalked it up to the basement lights. The man said nothing, so my dad continued grabbing boxes and taking them upstairs. He saw Jason and told him that there was some weird old man downstairs. Jason went white as a sheet and said, "The moving truck is in back. No one is here but us." They both went back downstairs and saw the figure, only it was slowly walking from corner to corner of the basement, with its back turned. "Excuse me, who are you?" Jason asked, before the man began screaming. My dad describes it as a deep yelling that got louder and higher pitched, like a kettle screeching on a hot stove with the lights flickering. Both of them couldn't find their feet and stood there, and suddenly, it all at once stopped as quickly as it started. They turned to look at each other and back at the figure, only instead of being at the other end of the hall, it was standing right in front of them. and they could smell something that reminded them of sick, and could see every line on this man's face, but there were no eyes. They finally turned to run and let the movers return and do the rest of the work. They only shared single glances, and they were reminded of that night as children when they are sure they saw the same face with black eyes. When Jason was unpacking boxes, he found an old photo album and flipped through it. He saw a picture he had never seen. His mother told him that that was his great-uncle William, who had lived at the house a long time ago. The story went that William had gone crazy and committed a horrible crime. And when his great-aunt Shirley came home, she found William passed away in the basement. But over his face were scratches where his eyes had been. There is no doubt in their minds that they had seen William, and one of the reasons Jason's mom finally decided to move was that in the bathroom, quite often she would find water all over, which she thought was a part of faulty plumbing, but the boys were sure that it was William. Deliberately Evil by Ouija Outback. Directly after graduating high school, I moved out of my parents' home and rented a house with my best friend Jacqueline. We were regularly throwing huge parties, staying up until sunrise, and enjoying living on our own for the first time. Somehow, we came across owning a Ouija board, and this is where my haunting begins. I grew up in a very religious household and full-heartedly believed in God, good and evil. I've always been spiritual, and when Jacqueline, my other friends, and I started playing this Ouija board, I was the communicator. Nobody else spoke to the spirits or to the board other than me. Our house was basically a 24-hour hangout spot, and we continued to play the Ouija board. More friends, friends of friends, and even complete strangers started reaching out to Jacqueline and I, asking to come over and play the Ouija board. People around our small town were hearing that Kathy and Jacqueline were communicating with ghosts, real ghosts. Although spiritual, I don't necessarily believe in ghosts. I do believe in demonic spirits that thrive in the form of physical oppression, mental anguish, and unexplainable events. And what occurred over the next 3 months of my life would only solidify that belief. The first real WTF moment we had was during a Ouija session with one of the larger random groups of people that visited. Everyone was standing around the table where I was seated with one or two others. All of a sudden, a girl lost consciousness and falls to the ground. Her dead weight hit the floor. She quickly regained consciousness and seemed more embarrassed than anything. She dusted herself off, laughing nervously, as we all mumbled to one another about when the hell was that. And this experience only gains attraction for Jack and I hosting Ouija nights. We'd been playing for a few weeks, and we'd had a few moments where an answer on the board had made the hair stand on the back of our necks, or the whole room audibly reacted in a frightened manner. But since the girl had passed out, nothing physical had taken place. I had become extremely comfortable and felt rather honored that I was the main communicator, although everything I was doing went against my upbringing. My mom had warned me against this kind of thing. I knew to never tell her what I was up to. One day, the encounters became physical. Jacqueline and I were getting ready for a night out in Washington, D.C. I was in the shower when I heard a very powerful banging on the bathroom door. It was only Jacqueline and I at home, and I knew I'd left the bathroom door unlocked for her to come in if needed. The pounding was so strong that it moved the door in and out of the door jamb, the light strobing from more to less as it shone through the open crevices around the door. "Yeah?" I loudly yelled, wondering why in the heck Jacqueline was pounding on the door. No answer. "Jacqueline!" I yelled again, waiting to hear her response. I waited another 30 seconds and then turned the shower off, soap still in my hair, all over my body. It was completely silent in the house. "Jacqueline?" I cautiously called out. She never responded, so I stepped out of the shower and quickly grabbed a towel. We had just gotten a puppy named Rue, and I couldn't hear her barking at anything. For a moment, I wondered if they'd both been abducted. I walked out of the bathroom. "Did you pound on my bathroom door?" I asked. No, she said. "Well, did you hear the banging?" I asked, now visibly freaked out. "No." She stood up and we huddled together as I recounted what happened. Jacqueline and I were thrill seekers. We were popular, sought out trouble together, and we thought we were invincible. This was fun, and while it was scary, it was adrenaline-inducing. The entire time we were getting ready from that point forward, Rue would randomly start backing away from specific places in Jacqueline's room with her head down. She would growl and bark at seemingly nothing. From that point on, I started to have experiences that I felt were only explained by a haunting of sorts. Once in my room, alone at night, I'd smelled something burned to my closet. I traced the smell to an old notebook where I'd kept notes from Sunday church sermons. One single page in the midst of hundreds was so badly burned that as I opened it, ashes fell to the ground. This specific page had some scriptures on it. No other page was burnt or even marked, just the one. Other times, I'd be alone at home doing my makeup. I'd sit on the floor in front of my mirror, and I'd lose a foundation or mascara that I had physically been holding and set down directly beside me. After spending minutes looking for it, I'd find it exactly where I'd set it in the first place. During instances like this, it was as though someone was watching and snickering at me. I felt like someone was deliberately playing tricks on me. The most persistent physical encounter would be when I laid down to sleep. I'd hear relentless scratching on my ceiling. It would always be directly above where I lay, like someone trying to claw their way to me. Jacqueline witnessed it, her boyfriend, our friends did as well. We eventually put mouse traps in the attic, but of course never caught a mouse. The food on the tray was never touched, and the scratching persisted, night after night. I recall throwing the blankets over my head and calling out, "In the name of Jesus, go away!" The 3 final encounters with this oppression would occur in a single weekend. I worked at a bank during the day and closed a cash office for retail at night. I drove a Subaru Outback and we lived right off of a well-traveled country road, so I always locked my door at night. Always. One morning, as I reach out to open my car door, I find that it's already opened, unlocked and ajar, resting as though it had been gently placed to sit, but not to close. I immediately thought my car had been broken into, but as I checked, I found my iPod, some cash, and other small valuables were still there. Perplexed but unshaken, I drove to work. I worked 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the bank and took my lunch at 12. I walked to the parking lot during my lunch, and as I got closer to my car, my jaw dropped. I quietly gasped. I got to my vehicle, and the driver's side door was open. Again, ajar but resting. That eerie, deliberate feeling of being tricked came over me, like someone was watching and laughing. I looked over both shoulders, checked the parking lot and my car. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing stolen, nothing to explain this. I knew I'd closed my door. I knew I locked my car. In fact, every other door was still locked. In that moment, I realized without a shred of doubt, whatever this thing is, it can follow me. It is following me. Finally, I was terrified. Until then, I hadn't collectively pieced together the pounding on the door while I showered, the burned page in my notebook, the missing and then quickly replaced makeup, the relentless scratching above my bed at night. As the oppression inched closer and closer to me, it finally found its way in my car. It was after me. It was with me. I was terrified. But I was also 18, invincible, and felt oddly attracted to seeing this thing played out. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to do next anyway. There was always a thought in the back of my mind that I was making it all up, imagining things. Even with Jacqueline and many other witnesses, I wouldn't allow myself to understand how deadly this could possibly be, until it was too late. The final encounter was the following morning after my car door was found open twice in a 24-hour period. It was Saturday morning, and I was driving down that well-traveled country road to the bank. I can attest on this particular morning I was not doing anything other than driving. I was not distracted, and I admit to going about 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. Both hands gripped on the steering wheel, no music on. My right peripheral catches a glimpse of a metal landmarker on the side of the road. I didn't even have time to blink. when the wheel was ripped out of my grasp and spun to the right. I was flying up an embankment, my car completely airborne. I'd never been in a car accident, let alone off-roading at high speeds upwards into a field. I had no control over the vehicle and no time to maneuver correction. I knew I was going to die or be severely hurt. I closed my eyes and braced myself as hard as I could. I clung to my steering wheel with white knuckles and drove the brake into the ground as hard as I could. I didn't open my eyes until every crash, crunch, and metal twisting, scraping sound was completely silent. My vehicle was up on the embankment and had just ripped an entire telephone pole out of the ground. The giant pole swung in the road, still attached to the phone lines. My Outback was spewing smoke and completely totaled. I stepped out of my vehicle on 2 feet, unscathed. I immediately broke down in sobs. What the heck just happened? The one and only car behind me was an all-black SUV. It was at a complete stop. When I looked over, expecting the driver to get out and run to me, to console me, to see if I was okay, the SUV started to accelerate. It slowly drove around the still swaying telephone pole and sped off. It was like a hitman that missed his target and needed to leave the scene. It just drove off. In the moment, I believed this was a complete jerk. But as I look back, that vehicle abandoning me and driving away seemingly as a mission failed is extremely symbolic as what was meant to happen to me that morning. I believe I was supposed to die. Someone failed, someone lost, and it wasn't me. I stayed at my parents' house for 2 days and nights. I didn't dare tell them what happened, certainly not my mother. I had no logical reason to give for the cause of the crash. I remember sleeping for what felt like the entire 48 hours. I never went to the hospital. I didn't need to. I had 2 bruises on my knees from bracing myself against the dash. I wasn't even wearing a seatbelt. Had I died, I would have been classified as a freak accident, an unexplainable car accident with an unprepared driver. But there was nothing accidental about that wreck. When I returned home, Jacqueline and I burned the Ouija board in our fireplace. It was the one and only fire we'd burn. I swore off witchcraft of any sort and won't touch anything in that sort ever again. The spiritual realm of good and evil, life and death is real. I will continue to tell my encounter to others who think it's fun and games, make-believe, or just scary stories. I used to think that too. I mean, after all, Ouija boards are sold in retail game sections. You've been warned. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts and what else you would like to see on the podcast and on the YouTube episodes.